Thanks. Richard Reeser, Disabled People Against the Cuts. We need to realise that there are 12 million people in this country, 1 in 5 who are disabled people. They all have an interest in being part of this campaign. Every one of them has been attacked by this government. Every single one of them. The policies that are now being put forward, policies that Mrs Thatcher herself put in place, recognising that the disability living allowance was the extra money you needed to live in an unequal society. She put that through. There's £12 billion a year, and that's what the government is targeting to cut. Now, we start from the point of view that equality is not treating everybody the same, it is giving them what they need to be members of our society. We hear Cameron and Clegg talking about human rights abuses in China and elsewhere. This is a human rights abuse. In 2009, the United Kingdom government signed the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and the new government has said they go along with it. But they are destroying the standard of living of people with disabilities, disabled people. In that convention, the government has an obligation to maintain the standards of living, to maintain accessibility. Now, we can rail against the government, but this debate is about councils. We have managed, through fighting for independent living for the last 30 years, to establish the right to have direct payments. That instead of a council worker coming and putting those of us who can't look after ourselves in terms of hygiene and getting into bed, they come round and put us into bed at 5 o'clock and get us up at 8 o'clock the next morning. Some of us have said that's not acceptable. If we want to go clubbing in the middle of the night and we meet someone and want to have sex with them, we have the right to do that. So we have direct budgets, and that was fought for and won by the disability movement in this country, and it's something directly threatened now by every council cut. We have a right to have the money that we would have got from those services so that we can employ people as and when we want them. That is threatened, that is against human rights, that is something we need to campaign around. There are many other smaller cuts occurring all over the country which will reduce our possibilities to lead an equal life. If we mobilise in every constituency, in every place, working here as allies of disabled people in their struggle for equality, alongside all of those others who are fighting for a better society, we have within our grasp the possibility of mobilising the millions that are necessary to do this. This will not be easy. A recent social attitude survey produced by the government in January shows that disabled people as a whole think that they are responsible for their problems more than society in general. Therefore, you have to become allies in campaigning that the problem we as disabled people have faced are the same that others have faced, and we need social and public support to overcome those barriers. Let's learn the lessons from the National League for the Blind and Disabled, who in 1919 marched on London from three different places. Their demand was rights, not charity. Our fear of the big society is it takes us back to charity.
I think we all know that the cuts we are facing are like nothing that has been seen since the 1920s. Even what Thatcher did is as nothing to the misery that we will face if these cuts are carried through. And so we have to say to councillors like Charlene, who's come and spoken here today, if not now, when? Yeah. This is the time when you have to decide that the only responsible thing to do is to refuse to implement the cuts, to resist and to fight back. Now, I think it's very good that this debate has been organised here today, and I think there is complete agreement between the Socialist Party and Right to Work that wherever councillors, regardless of our differences with them on other issues, wherever councillors are prepared to vote against cuts, anti-cuts movement with open arms, and we have a duty to do all we can to build support for those councillors. The problem that we face is that there isn't very many of them. We also think, and I hope you agree with this, that it's necessary to put pressure on those councillors who are saying they've got no choice but to carry out the cuts. And that's why we're asking today that Right to Work supports the demonstration to the Labour Local Government Conference, alongside the demonstrations to the Tory and Liberal conferences, but demanding that they don't implement the condemned cuts and that they stand up and fight. But we do face a different situation today than that which existed in the 1980s. At that stage, there were 20 Labour councils who at least said in words that they would be prepared to defy the Thatcher government. When it came to the crunch, it was only Liverpool and Lambeth that stood firm. But today, with the extra money that councillors get, the move to the right of the Labour Party, there is not a single council in the country that is saying that they are going to be prepared to defy the cuts. We know, and we have to put the record straight, Liverpool City Council, even despite the fact it was fighting with only Lambeth, was able to win an extra £60 million for that local city. And they did it because they organised a mass movement in their support. City-wide public sector general strikes. And by the way, the councillor from Hackney, there was a 250-strong Hackney Unison meeting last week, which voted unanimously to support a one-day public sector strike, and voted overwhelmingly to call on the council to set a needs budget. So there's your pressure to convince your colleagues to vote no. And it's undoubtedly the case that any council that stood and fought would get massive support from the workforce in that city, but also from up and down the country. But we in the anti-cuts movement have a duty to prepare working class people for what is likely to happen. And we feel in the Socialist Party that Right to Work have made a mistake by having Labour councillors who have not said that they oppose the cuts, well, they've said they oppose the condemned cuts, but they haven't said they're going to vote against cuts, on platforms as leaders of the anti-cuts movement, of giving the impression to working people that a road to fight might be by getting your Labour councils to stand up for you. I'm sure that every member of Right to Work in Manchester is horrified by the devastation that Labour council has voted for. But Right to Work put out a leaflet calling for a lobby of the council to say, let's lobby with our councillors against the condemned cuts, without a word about the fact that at least the Cabinet had agreed that they were going to vote for those cuts. And the reason we think that's a mistake is because it disarms the movement. It confuses them for what is coming. It is a bit like the Stop the War movement, when Charles Kennedy was able to claim that he was a real anti-war activist and speak at the mass demonstration, while socialists were not able to put their point of view, and that confused the movement. We have to be clear. We have to warn working class people. It's going to take strike action, demonstrations, occupations in order to defeat this government. You cannot rely on all but a handful, and we welcome those handful of Labour councils, councillors, no councils, to fight on your behalf. And it's also important, as Dave says, that alongside industrial action, we put pressure on the councillors another way, which is by saying, if you're not prepared to fight, then stand aside. And if you don't, we will stand anti-cuts candidates against you in the local elections.
As his constituency in our borough, and he's conspicuous by his absence in terms of any comments in Doncaster about the impact of cuts on the most vulnerable. And we also have a Labour group in a mayoral authority which occupies a majority of seats. Now, in terms of the question of whether they could vote against the Mayor's budget, we have argued with them, we have lobbied against them, and we have told them that you can do this with impunity. You can vote down the Mayor's budget on its first reading, but it will be brought back and it will be voted on a second time. You have to get a two-thirds majority that will go through. So they could stand with the most vulnerable. They could stand with the communities of Doncaster that will be hit so hard by these cuts. knowing that that will then position them for their strategy for getting elected in May. But they are conspicuous by their absence. There is not one Labour councillor in Doncaster who will come forward. And because of that, the movement that needs to be developed and has started to be developed in Doncaster, the movement on the streets, the movements against the closure of libraries, against the closure of children's residential units, social education centres, is building. We have lobbied meetings of the Employer Relations Committee, very loud, very angry, and well-attended lobbies. It has not made any difference. And we've had to be very clear with all of the people in those campaigns that the readings that Alan Gibbons mentioned earlier on, the readings that started in Doncaster last year, are only a polite first step. They are only so far down the route to really defending libraries. Because to paraphrase Pat Stack last week in an article in the SWP's review, what they are in favour of is our right to protest. What they are not in favour of is our right to win. Now, we've argued within the Save Doncaster Libraries campaign, in workplace meetings, in joint union meetings, that we will have to go further than many local government workers and many campaigners have ever gone before. And we'll have to go further than many of them at the moment feel comfortable with. We will have to disrupt council meetings. We will have to occupy libraries. We will have to take coordinated industrial action and approach it with a determination and a strategy to win. On Thursday of last week, we were given permission, we were authorised to conduct an industrial action ballot of all Unison members in Doncaster. And that ballot will start as soon as we've managed to complete the 14 tasks that Unison sets us to cleanse membership. yeah. If you're in Unison, you know what I'm talking about. The most important aspect of this is that those Labour councillors, because we know there are those that privately support us, but there are those who are in positions of authority and power in Doncaster who say that because we have commissioners, government intervention, that we have to be seen to be reasonable. We have to be seen to be able to make the difficult decisions. And we have to say to them that if you are only able to make decisions with a gun pointed at your head, you are nothing more than a human shield, a patsy for the naked exercise of government power to decimate communities. Doncaster Council sets its budget on the 21st of February, and we are calling for all local government workers and all of those who use public services to lobby, to attend and to disrupt that meeting, to prevent that budget from being passed. Thank you.